Hi. Okay, looks like we are live, and tonight we are going to have a conversation all about Jess and all about how Jess learned how to train horses. So, if you're new here, then I'm Lindsay. This is my husband Jess. We own and operate Hayes Cofell Performance Horses. We're based in London, Ontario. We do mostly riding horses. Jess does most of the training. I do quite a lot of the teaching. And we are on here every Tuesday night at 7:30 to answer questions from you guys. So all the questions that we have been covering have been sent in from you guys. This one was sent in a few weeks ago. We're just getting around to it now. If you have questions, you can leave them in the comments here of the live. You can send them to us by Facebook Messenger. You can send an email. Basically, any way that we can get messages, you can send them. And we will keep track of those and try to get to your question as quickly as we can. So, what else do we have to say? So we'll be here for a little while. We usually ramble a little bit. We usually get into these chats and we're here for 40 minutes, close to an hour. I don't know how long you feel like talking about yourself tonight, but we will be here for a little while, so get comfortable and let us know when you're watching. I can see some of you guys are watching already. That's great. Hi. And the other thing that we had to say was that these lives are brought to you by our online program, Momentum, which is an online coaching experience. Momentum, the doors are opening on Sunday. Again, they're opening from Sunday to Friday, and we are welcoming new members. We're enrolling new members. So if you are interested in that, you can find that information by going to www.momentumhcph.com, and I will add that in the title here of the live when I'm done, but you can find it on our webpage as well. And if you are really digging these lives and you want to get into it a little bit further, then you probably want to make sure that you are signed up to be one of our insiders. So you can do that. I'll add the link here afterwards, but you can do that also on our website. And when you become an insider, you get an email every week. You get a reminder. You're the first to know about what the topic is tonight. You get the replay sent to you from the previous week. You get any upcoming events that we have going on at the farm. You get a featured tack product or kind of whatever we have going on, as well as a preview of what's going on in our online program. So all of that to be said, let's get into our question for tonight, which is all about Jess. Jess is the star tonight of the show. Everybody wanted to know where Jess learned how to train horses. So if you have questions as we go along, then we would ask you to just drop those into the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can, and I'll try to make sure that he answers your questions as well as some of the ones that have been submitted today. So we are in our living room today instead of out in the barn like we normally would be, and it's just really cold and windy, so we decided to stay in here, and we have not got help with the kiddos, so we might have a couple of little blonde visitors,
guest speakers.
Yeah. Oh boy.
No.
Okay, no guarantees on how productive we're going to be tonight. So let's start. And actually, I just saw, Nikolai, I just saw that you asked a good question to start us off with, and that was, when did you know that you wanted to train horses for a living?
Jesse's turn.
You gotta be quiet, okay.
I always knew I wanted to work with horses. As a kid, I mean, we started horses. We rode a lot of ponies as little kids. I didn't want to show horses, but I did want to, I mean, typical thing as a kid, you know, in southwestern Ontario, teacher asked you what you want to be, and you always want to be a cowboy. I was like the only kid in my class that always wanted to be that. I grew up more in the rodeo mentality. I wanted to rope calves and ride bucking horses and bulls, and that's all I wanted to do. I really didn't care about the show horses, but the horse training part, I always liked working with young horses and riding them and getting them broke. That was right off the bat. Never wanted anything else. Never wanted a real job. Never wanted anything else.
Okay, so you always knew that you wanted to be a cowboy.
Always did. Cowboy in southwestern Ontario. Why not?
And okay, so the way that you grew up was different from me. I grew up in the city, but you grew up on a farm with horses, with parents who were into horses and already active in the industry.
Yeah, my parents did a lot of club shows. They'd go to club shows all over the place, from Windsor up we're in London now and up this way. My dad, he'd rope and he'd show a little bit. He liked to rope more than anything, and he liked to play with the young horses. He really liked fitting up young horses and stuff like that. My mom would show like the pleasure and the barrels and all the different events at the club shows. They did a lot of buying and selling. So there, in between buying and selling, there was an awful lot of riding that needed to happen and get them broke and make them look better. So that's what we did. I grew up just outside of Thamesville, and my parents rented a little farm out there that had a barn that, I don't know, it might have been, 4 stalls and a little lean-to off the side, and there was horses everywhere.
Okay, so tell us about your first paying client.
I have no idea who my first paying client was.
Or the first horse that you had. You don't know? How old were you?
I have no idea, because all I can ever remember was people bringing us ponies and horses, and like I can remember in grade school riding horses for people for a little bit of money, and I have no idea who my first customers would have been.
How old would you have been when you were getting paid to ride ponies for people?
Oh, I can
Like
remember.
a little kid? Like little ponies for kids to ride?
Oh yeah, like grade 5 and 6. I mean, we were riding anything that had hooves on it. We didn't care, good or bad, pony, horse. We didn't care. We just rode them.
And how much would you have been paid? Do you know?
Likely not a lot.
Couple bucks a ride? Or something?
I got paid what I was worth. We got them broke though. We rode them hard. That's one thing as a kid. Everybody around us, so different than nowadays where information was so out there. I mean, I don't remember anybody knowing how to make a show horse or knowing how to do whatever. They just rode them. They just got them broke, and they put hours on them and wet saddle blankets and made them horses. I don't think we got paid a lot. We had fun though.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So after that phase, did you get a job? You got a job working for somebody. Can you tell us about that? Got a job working for another trainer? Come here and just whisper.
My first job was for a horseshoeer, who at the time I didn't realize was such a huge part of my life. Everybody called him the Dutchman, Peter Van Aert. And Peter used to get hurt all the time. He was famous for getting into trouble, and he'd get hurt and he'd need help shoeing horses, and he'd come pick me up. Lots of times he'd pick me up from school or whatever, and we'd go shoe horses, and then after that we'd ride a few. And at the time I just did it whenever he got hurt, and not realizing later on, a few years later on, I'd end up living with him and learning from him. And he is quite a man. He's still alive. He's in a home now, but he every time he'd get hurt, he needed somebody to come work, and he got hurt a lot, so I had lots of employment from him.
So was that like an apprenticeship, or was that a paid position?
Oh, he'd always give me a little money, because I mean, I didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, and I think he felt sorry for me and paid me. I'm sure it wasn't, I'm sure it wasn't any help to him that he actually should have paid me for it, but he'd always give me a little money, and I thought I was king of the world, and he'd help me out, and it was a lot of fun.
Okay, so that's Peter, and how old were you at that point?
Oh, grade 8 or 9, I'd go with him shoeing. I'd go, he'd let me tag along. And then into like grade 9 and 10, I went with him quite a bit then. I mean, once I was
And you were
in high
doing,
school,
like you were shoeing, like you were doing some of the work? Or,
oh yeah,
yeah.
we'd shoe together, and my dad shot horses, so I knew how to shoe, and then Peter would sure help me and put a little more to it, and he'd let me shoe them and trim them and finish them, and do whatever needed to be done, and then we'd go home and to his place and ride colts and get horses fit and stuff. And Peter was very good at letting you kind of experiment a little bit and letting you do the work. He wasn't so worried about if you messed up. But he was.
And what kind of horses would it have been? What kind of riding would it have been at that point?
Somebody just told me to speak up. All right, I'll speak up.
Yeah, you're kind of mumbling.
Everything. Peter had, he had every kind of horse you could imagine he could ride. He rode hunter jumpers and dressage horses when he was honed. He rode saddlebreds and trick horses, and he had circus horses every once in a while. He had everything. He liked the reiners. He liked getting them broke and doing that. But you never knew what was going to be in his barn. You might walk in that barn one day and there'd be a Clyde cross, or it might be a pony cross, and everything imaginable in between. He stood some studs. He had at that time he had an Appaloosa and an old black quarter horse. But you never knew what you were going to ride. If he could make a buck on it, he would buy something out of a sale one day, or he'd buy something when he was out shoeing, and you never, ever knew what was going to be in the barn. It was an adventure walking in there every day. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so no reining, or a little bit of reining at this point.
A little bit of reining. I would start the colts and he would play with it, and everything he had broke. He would take like a big draft cross English horse, and he'd teach it to spin, or he'd teach it to do, you never knew. He liked to do all that. He'd teach everything to spin. He'd teach everything to change leads. That was just his way of doing things. And he never, you just never knew what he'd teach one. It was the most interesting experience. The old black stud he had, just a perfect example. He was an impressive bred horse, and I can say it now because the horse has been dead for 20, 30 years. I don't think anybody else would have put up with him. He was a black, impressive horse. It was real pretty. Impressive Ray was his name.
Pat DeLebeck is saying Impressive Ray.
Yeah, Impressive Ray. And he was just as sneaky and smart and right on the verge of being mean, but Pete could play with his brain like nobody else. And he could do things with that horse, and he did tricks with him. He could do any kind of trick you could imagine on. Did demonstrations of not demonstrations, but performances, I guess you'd say. He traveled around and did those with tricks. And then he won Quarterama in the freestyle reining. He wasn't the best reining horse in the world, but he had, he was just so broke he could do all the maneuvers and did it so well. And nobody else would have given that horse two minutes of time to get him that broke or do all that stuff. But Pete just liked him.
Pete had him as a breeding stallion?
He bred with him.
Bred mares? Okay.
Bred with him, did tricks on him, showed him. sometimes all on the same day. You never knew. He was quite a... Him and Peter were a pair. That there was no other way to describe it, because nobody else would have ever been able to do what he did with that horse. But
So I've
two
heard
got
stories about teaching a horse how to run barrels with the parrot on its back.
Parrot, yep.
Is that horse?
that was one of the horses. Yep, that was the infamous one that got the parrot.
That was impressive, Ray.
That was impressive, Ray.
Okay.
And
And
like
how many
most
mares?
things,
Like, would there be a lot of his babies around at that time?
at the time there likely was. There was likely, I'd hate to guess the number, but back then, before ship semen and all that stuff, I want to say 20 mares a year, 30 mares a year, some years, and everything. You know, there'd be show horses. There'd be some of his babies went on and showed a little bit and did all right. Every kind of mare imaginable, because you know he was the shoer, so he'd go around, and when he was shoeing, somebody'd say, "I have a mare to breed," and he'd breed the neighbor's mare, and he'd breed.
Okay.
He didn't care.
Yeah. What the heck?
You know, back then it was a little different than it is today.
Yeah.
You know, you just bred mares, and sometimes better ones, sometimes worse ones, and there was he had a neat way of breeding mares. He'd back the mares into the stall, and he had Ray trained that Ray would stand in the back corner until he would bring them out, and he never had a shank on him or nothing. You just have him in the back corner, and you back the mare into the stall, and I mean, I've never seen that done since, and nobody else would like
Yeah,
to be
I
able
feel
to
like
do it.
we don't recommend that.
No, there was a
But
lot of
this is
things that we
not
did
an
back.
instructional. No, I just want
There
to
was
check
lots
and
of stuff
see.
we did at Peter's that you didn't advise. I mean, even that dang parrot.
People are saying they remember impressive.
Oh yeah,
Ray.
everybody remembered him. He was hard to
John's saying
forget.
have to love. I think he meant Spook. It says
Spook, yeah, there's an old
Spook.
big draft horse called Spook, and there was a lot of neat horses. And
Oh, okay. So Nancy, you're getting ahead of us here about Italy. And Carolyn O'Neill remembers you at the Appy shows, just a young whippersnipper, but always polite. Isn't that nice? Okay, so yeah, I feel like you could talk about Peter for a really
yeah,
long
it was such
time.
a
We could talk
huge influence on my life. I mean, I could go
Yeah.
forever about what he did and what he did for me and my family, and just a great guy.
Okay, so let's go to okay, so you're working for Peter, and you were also at that time you were also still rodeoing.
Still rodeoing. One of the benefits of working for Peter too was that he used to rodeo when he was younger. So if I wanted to go to a rodeo, that was great. Go. And sometimes he'd even come with me. Yeah, I was rodeoing. Wasn't showing. When I got into high school, I really wasn't showing. I didn't want to go to horse shows. I just wanted to go rodeo. And we went hard. We went a lot of places. And it was great working for Peter, because I'd come home and, there was a job on Monday morning, and a job where I could still go play cowboy.
So you were rodeoing like super, super competitively in high school, right? All through high school?
I kind of took off. I rodeoed a little bit in Ontario, up in Quebec, and then I kind of took off, and I really enjoyed rodeoing
You gotta talk louder. So
Michigan, Ohio. We'd go into Virginia's and Illinois and that kind of stuff, and for a high school kid, we thought we were kings of the world, but we just went every weekend. My dad never cared if I was gone. If I was going to a rodeo, he never cared. It was, as long as I was behaving and not getting into trouble, he'd let me go wherever I wanted to go, and sent me with a lot of guys that were, happy to go places. And yeah, I got to go a lot of places just rodeoing, and I don't know that I show, even club shows I didn't show for a couple of years. I just rode horses, but I never showed. I'd get them started, and Pete would play with them or whatever, but I didn't.
Okay, so all through high school you're riding with Peter, but you're gone at the rodeos most of the time you're going to school a little bit
Little bit,
in
yep.
between there.
Very,
I would
very little
assume.
bit.
Okay. And then what?
Got the end of high school, had a couple pretty good wrecks. Messed my knee up real bad.
On horses or bulls?
A little bit of everything. I had 2 good wrecks.
Like training horses or?
No,
Okay.
I had 2 big wrecks riding bulls. One where a bull fell on me and kind of rolled over on top of me kind of hard, and the other one, I wrecked my knee when I was in Tennessee one time. And at the end of high school,
How'd that one happen?
I didn't stay on.
Okay.
I come off and I got hung up in a bull rope, and the bull stepped on the side of my knee, and it didn't end well for me.
Okay.
And then right after high school, I was still working for Pete a little bit. I was rodeoing quite hard, but I was really getting beat up a lot. Had a number of concussions. And was showing a little bit. I was trying to take it a little bit easy one summer. I kept getting hurt, so I was trying to take it easy. And some friends of the family...
Take it easy from all the rodeos, you mean? Like from riding bulls and stuff?
Yeah, like so instead of going
Yeah.
to 4 a week, our idea of taking it easy was going to 2 and 3 a week.
Okay.
And I got into a job. Jerry and Judy Daniels had some paint horses.
Yeah, talk louder.
And I'd been shoeing for them. And I was riding a lot of horses for them. And they bought a couple that they wanted to show. And I went and showed them a little bit. Very, very little. Western pleasure horses and the 2-year-old snaffle bit stuff. My dad was still showing Appaloosas, and I would go show that a little bit. It wasn't my main thing. I still wanted to just rodeo, but I was starting to do it a little bit. I was, the starting horses had definitely creeped into my brain a little bit that I wanted to, get better at riding horses and getting them broke. To me, it wasn't about showing horses. It was about figuring out how to get them broke. And I definitely picked that up from Peter. It was just about getting into their brains. And then after high school, I kind of graduated. I wouldn't say I succeeded very well at it, but I got through high school.
You got through it.
I got I never did pick up my diploma. The weekend of my graduation, I took off to a rodeo. And I never did pick up my diploma, so I can't say I for sure graduated.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So
School
that
was
what
not
it is.
a major thing.
No,
major
it was not.
focus. Okay.
And a good friend of mine who is still a great friend of ours today, definitely got to be more of a friend with him as years went on, Craig Black, called me up and he offered me a job. He had a guy that wanted a worker, wanted a guy riding horses, starting colts, and I thought perfect. And I had my knee operation. I needed some time where I wasn't going to rodeo anyway. So I thought, perfect. How hard can it be? I'll go over to Italy, ride horses all year, get healthy, and then go back to rodeo. And so
Okay,
I literally
so
packed up my bags. And
what was the job offer? Like, what were you supposed to be doing?
I was supposed to be starting colts for Johnny Vivaldi, who was a sale horse guy, but did some show horses too. Mm-hmm. It was literally one of them deals. I met him, and
Here?
met him at Craig Black's place,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole job interview, because he didn't speak English and I didn't speak any Italian, was Craig said, "Well, go ride this horse," and it was his daughter's horse, a big old Appaloosa.
It was Craig's daughter's horse? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
It was Craig's daughter's horse,
Craig's horse? Mm-hmm.
and he was an old, broke reiner. And I'd never rode a reiner, and all I thought was, great, I'm going to spin this horse and I'm going to fall off. That's all that was going through my brain the entire time. And rode it around, spun it a little bit, loped it around, whatever. And Johnny says, okay, if he'll ride colts, I'll take him. And a couple days later, I'm on a plane over there.
So after a very involved interviewing process,
Oh yeah.
you knew exactly who you were going to work for and what the purpose was.
I had no
You were
idea.
the most qualified candidate.
Oh, for
You
sure.
got the job.
I was the only one dumb enough to say yes. I had no idea where Nizza, Monferrato, Italy was. I had no idea who this guy I was going across with, and I was on the plane with him. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Italian, and here we are flying halfway across the world. And that was me going to Italy. 18 years old. I had a house. I had a...
When you got there.
Oh, yeah, that's... I had a house. I had a young lady cooked for me. Her and her husband worked at the farm there. And I was off. And had no idea there was supposed to be a gentleman that was going to show for them. And he never showed up. Of all the weird things, the guy just took a different job. I got to know him that summer. I met him, and he took another job. And all of a sudden, I was head trainer, and I had to learn how to show some horses that I had no idea how to do.
Okay. Okay, so you get there. It's a reining facility. Place.
They did reiners. They did pleasure horses.
Yeah.
Mostly Vivalda's. Johnny bought and sold a lot of horses. That was he loved to buy and sell them. And we would show them. We would show reiners. I showed pleasure horses, some Western riders, anything. If he could get it sold, that's what he wanted in the barn. He didn't care.
Okay.
He had 5 or 6 studs, 30 or so training horses.
So you go thinking you're starting colts.
That's what I thought.
Then you get there, the other guy had quit?
He never showed up.
Didn't show.
He never showed up. He was supposed to show up.
So then they said to you, hey, can you do it? Or how did this go down? How did it go from you being a colt starter to a head reining trainer, and at this point you don't know how to train reining horses?
Mostly I got put up into that because I couldn't speak Italian, because I'm sure...
Oh my gosh.
I'm sure Mr. Vivalda...
do they know this? Like, I don't know what the chances are of them watching this in Italy, but do they know that you didn't know how to before you said yes to the job?
Oh, I'm sure they figured it out real
Really
quick.
quick? Okay.
I'm sure they watched me and went, what the heck did we just bring over here? I mean, I rode horses. I knew how to ride horses. I knew how to get them broke, but
Yeah.
we went to the first horse show a couple weeks before the first horse show. They handed me the reins of a mare and said, you're going to show this horse. And I'd never rode a real reiner.
And it was a good one? They had some good ones?
No, it was fried. That one was so fried.
Oh, geez. Okay.
She was second at the European Futurity, and she was fried. They used her brain up. Looking back, I should have been dead. She would sit there and actually shake when people... It was a horrible deal. She was very talented.
Shoot. She was fried, like...
Mentally. Oh, yeah. They had fried her
hard.
really, really hard.
Oh.
And she was a Hollywood Dunnup mare out of a skipping stage daughter. Gorgeous mare. Had a lot of things to her, but looking back, at that time, I even knew she was fried, because even at the first horse show, a couple of the guys from North America would come up to me and be like, you're going to try to show that? It was a great first experience. I advise it for everybody.
Okay.
But I didn't speak Italian. And
So how did that go then? Tell everybody how that went. How did you learn how to train reiners as the head trainer with nobody around to teach you how to do it?
I went and annoyed every one of the, over there they call them the Americans, like the Canadians.
Didn't you call your dad and ask him to send you some
Oh God, I used to call my dad every day.
Dad, can you send me some Randy Paul training videos?
Oh, it was any video they could have. I remember they had the Bob Loomis book at the farm. They had a couple videos at the farm.
Okay.
I used to harass my dad, send me any kind of literature, and I'd stay up at night and, read something and then try it for the next week. That's all I would work on horses. And I'd phone back to Peter, and I think I even phoned back to Craig a few times, like, what the heck am I doing? And I remember talking to Peter a lot on the phone of like, Pete, like, what do I do with this? And it was always just keep the basics, keep going. And it was fun. it was
Okay, so did you get to show some horses there and ride some good ones, or when did you start showing?
We had good ones and we had poor ones.
Okay.
We had everything from, I mean, I was second at the pre-futurity on one of my 3-year-olds. Oh yeah, I used to go ride with the other Americans over there and just like, you need to help me. I'll ride your broncs. I'll ride your horrible 2-year-olds. You just help me with this stuff. And it worked out. I hooked up with a little Doc Quixote mare who, when I got there, wasn't the easiest. She kind of a little crazy at the time, and I was just young and just kept riding her. And she was second at the pre-futurity. Stupid me showed her at the futurity, and brain went dead, and I overspun. And I just remember going, oh. Because after the pre-futurity, they had sold her for a lot of money.
Oh.
And
then you showed her an overspunner?
I overspun her. And we had some really good success.
So I feel
we had
like a bunch of people that ride with you are just taking a mental note of that now.
Oh yeah, oh trust
me. The next time that they overspin.
Oh yeah, do it in front of.
Yeah.
And it was good. We had a couple pleasure horses do really good at the European Nationals that year. And it wasn't for, knowledge and knowing how to do it. I just rode them. I rode them a lot. We'd ride, I'd work for 12, 14 hours a day, have dinner, and then go back down and ride in the middle of the night because I was just, I just wanted to figure this out. I got really
What American trainers did you meet up with or learn from or see when you were there? Because a lot of American trainers would go over and have been over to Italy, right?
Oh yeah, there was to make a couple of the most influential. There was Tim Curtis was over there. He was just this really cool old. I shouldn't say old. He wasn't that old at the time, but when you're 18, everybody thinks that. He was a cow horse guy that had done some reiners, and he just had a really neat way of. I'm sure, like he likely never even realized how much he was helping me, but he just had a really cool way of talking about it. There's Jim Long. There's a few of them guys. Jim Kaiser was over there still. There was a few of those guys that were still over there. Todd Summers come over for the pre-futurity and then came over for the futurity, working for Enzo Gallo, but also had a horse for my boss. Pierre Olay was there. He was a French-Canadian. There was a really neat group over there. Don Boyd and Bryant Pace was over there. Bryant Pace was one of the neatest guys for me to ask questions to, because anybody that knew Brian, he was just this, to me, larger than life guy that just, he'd won the worlds. He just, no BS, just this is how it was. He was an old Marine guy that became a horse trainer. He was just a very cool guy, and you could ask him anything. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so how long were you in Italy?
Only a year. I was determined. I was coming back, and I was rodeoing. I was still gonna be a cowboy at that point. Every noon hour at, I'd still jog up. We lived on the side of a mountain kind of thing, and I'd go jog and, push weights, and my whole gear was still. I was going back rodeoing. This horse showing things, even though my brain was involved in it and I was really working at it, my brain was still on. I was gonna go rodeo. I was still going back to that.
All right. So you came back, and then what happened?
Came back, was riding horses for people.
So you're like kind of training on your own now. Not working for somebody.
I wasn't working for anybody at that point when I got right home. Peter's wife, who was just this wonderful, wonderful woman, had just died of cancer, and I didn't want to bother him by having me around there. Is what I was in my head, and I went and rented a barn, a little show barn up by the lake up here, and I had everything. I had some pleasure horses. I had one lady sent me a reining horse, and I was doing that, and then it's the same thing. On the weekends, I'd take off and go rodeoing. And that year, the biggest switch for me was I wasn't just thinking of rodeoing. And when I would go to rodeo, my brain was on training horses, and I literally quit one weekend. We were driving home, and I looked over at one of my traveling partners at the time, and I said, guys, I'm done. And that had all been in my brain for years. I mean, that's all I want to do is ride bucking horses and bulls. And I says, I got something else on my brain. I want to go train horses. And that was the last time I ever went to part. Last time I ever went to a rodeo.
Called it like just cold turkey.
Yeah, my mentality too was I was riding the type of bulls that if you're not in it at 100%, you were going to get hurt. And I had seen lots of people do it. And I didn't want to do that where I was doing it halfway. You're either all in or you're all out. And I thought, well, if I'm not all in, I'm going to get hurt. And, that's not what I want to do either. So at that point, I gave my rigging bag to a buddy of mine with a bunch of stuff in it. He wanted to be a cowboy, and sold most of my other stuff. And I had borrowed a bronc saddle from a guy, gave it back to him, and oddly enough, I went to about a half an hour of a rodeo since then, because it was right here in town. I've never been to a rodeo since.
Okay. So
I
then
quit
what?
cold turkey, and now
what?
I was a horse trainer.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I was nothing more than a horse trainer at that point. That's all I wanted to do. Spent that summer riding horses. Mm-hmm. I had rented a little apartment in Paincourt and was riding out by the lake and showed some paint pleasure horses. Had one 2-year-old reiner in the barn. The Fentons out of Chatham had bought one at a Nelson Billier sale, and he was my only reiner, 2-year-old reiner. And
so how old were you at this point?
I would have been 19 then.
Okay.
19 then, and I went into the fall. I was starting to get really low on horses. Any young trainer, wintertime always slows down. And I took a job, the same thing, talk about spur of the moment. I was at the Canadian National Appaloosa Show, was in Ancaster that year. And I showed an old Doxton Anka bred Appaloosa that I bought off Burnley Joy. Showed him there, and a guy from Minnesota was there. He was a sale horse guy that did a lot of showing. And he said, "You want a job?" And I went, "I likely will." And I took off to Minnesota. A couple months later, when winter set in, I said I can be done about the end of September. And I called him up the end of September. I says, "You still got a job? I'll come take it." He said, "Come on out." So I drove out to Crookston, Minnesota. And it was cold.
So why did you take that job? Why would you go to Minnesota? Nothing against Minnesota. Nothing against Minnesota, but why would you go to Minnesota? It's not like the hub of...
I was working so much for Peter, who was a great horse trainer. There was no doubt. He could make horses do things unbelievable in their mind. But he wasn't a showman. He couldn't show a show horse. Or I shouldn't say he couldn't, but he didn't like it. And this guy, Joey Jorgensen was his name, he had a ton of sale horses, and he could show anything. At the Appaloosa Nationals that year, he brought in some good horses, some bad horses, some halter horses, pleasure, reiners. I don't think he did the cow horses there. But he just showed everything, and he did it well, and he just had a way about him that he could show. His horses, nothing against him, but they weren't as broke as I was used to with Peter, but he could get them showed. And I thought, this is kind of a neat, different deal. And he had a heated indoor arena. That was another...
Okay. There it is.
I have never been so cold in my life, but he had a heated indoor arena, so I took off to Crookston, Minnesota.
And how long were you there for?
I was only there until the end of December. I was going back after Christmas. I came back to visit my dad at Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to go back out, the U.S. government decided I likely should have more paperwork than I actually did.
So you were only there for a few months?
I was only there a few months.
Okay. And did you get to ride some good ones there, or?
I rode good ones, bad ones, everything in between. And we rode hard. He was a great guy to work for. But man, you rode a lot of horses and you rode them hard.
Mm-hmm. I know you talk about him a lot when we've talked about stuff that we're trying to build in the barn, because he had a lot of good ideas for...
He was a great businessman. I mean, this was 75 stalls of sale horses, show horses, whatever, and we still had stuff, tied out in different barns and whatever. And he was one of the few horse trainers that I'd ever seen that was a good businessman, and he thought through everything. He had everything down on paper, what kind of truck. It wasn't about whether it was flashy. It was, would it make him money? And he was a very, very neat guy that way. Very, very neat. And we were supposed to go back and go to some shows and sales. And when I got turned around the border, it never happened. But we went to some really neat shows out there. Had a lot of fun. He was a great guy to work for. I mean, he worked you hard, but he was good about it at the end of the day. And it was a good experience. I wished it would have been a lot longer. That dang government just wants paperwork. Oof.
Okay. Let's leave that alone. So, then you came back from Minnesota and you were...
I don't think you say came back.
So then
I stayed back.
Were in Ontario.
Involuntarily.
And you were working... Now you were working for yourself again, but this time out of Pete's barn. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, all of a sudden, I am stuck at home. I had no barn, no...
You gave up your rig and bag. Now what are you going to do?
I didn't have anything. I didn't even have a saddle. I had nothing. Because I'd sold it all. I was going to go work down there for a long time. I had nothing to worry about. And Peter stopped by the farm. And he'd heard that I had got stuck at the border. And he says, well... there's horses all around. Why don't you just use some stalls at my place? And anybody who knew Peter back then, I mean, it wasn't the fanciest barn in the world, but it was walls and it had an indoor and it was in the middle of the bush. We could ride in the wintertime. And I was definitely at that point ready to learn. I know everybody says at that point you kind of think you know everything. I started to realize I knew nothing. And I really wanted to learn how to get into horses' brains. I was open to that idea. I wanted to learn how to train horses.
So how old were you then at this point? Now you're 20?
So now I'm 20.
Okay. So how many people that are watching knew Jesse at this point or before this point? If you guys knew Jesse or had been at a horse show or had a horse trained, had a pony trained... if you have, can you write in here? Because I always think it's interesting to see who knows him from different parts of his life. And then we'll continue. Because I feel like that's kind of a turning point. Because
that was a huge turning point for me because Pete let me stay up and he had a little apartment up in his barn.
Yeah.
Hadn't been lived in years.
Yeah.
And I didn't care. I was 20 years old. I just want to ride horses.
Yeah.
I would stay up there and, he'd have all his horses and I'd have some there. And he made me a deal I couldn't turn down. And, we rode horses. And he had some decent horses. But the biggest thing with Peter, his mentality was, and for a bunch of years, he'd always remind me of this, is that, because we'd try to always get him to get a better horse so that he could really make a big show horses and stuff. And his mentality always was, a monkey can train a good horse to be a show horse, but the people that can train these kind of horses are horsemen. And, there'd be crossbreds, and he'd buy the rank and the rood, and he'd make them horses. That was his mentality. So that was where I learned how to train horses. Was not by taking the good ones and making them something by, you take those ones that weren't maybe the most talented or the best ones in the world, and you go make them those horses. That was what made horses, or made it. You had to think about what to do. You had to really be on the ball, because if you messed up with those ones and you messed up their brains, they didn't come back. So that was a lot of fun, and Pete would let us try everything on so many horses, because it was just a revolving door. There's always horses in there, but.
So that was, what year was that?
97-ish. 95 I was in Italy, I think. 96. So that'd be like 97, I think. Maybe 98. 97. Yeah, 97.
All right.
And that was a big turning point for me, because I had a horse for Tanya Fenton, who I just found out passed away a little while ago. I had a horse for her, like I said, she bought out of Nelson Sale. And I had made a deal for another horse to show. And both these two colts were really nice horses in different regards. The horse of Fenton's, you didn't really look at him and think he was a good horse. He cribbed, he weaved. He didn't have much of a tail, kind of high-headed, a little ugly, but he could do some things. He was super talented. And then there was a little cute black horse, I'm a Classy Toy, who was just really good-brained. Nice horse, and real pretty, real cute horse. And I showed them a little that summer. I like the quarter horse shows and the. I was gonna go to the Congress that year with the sorrel horse, or I did go to the Congress with them, and they were 3-year-olds, and started showing those horses. And then at that time, I was working for Nelson Billier a ton with the sale horses, and he kept my barn full. I never ever. That was one thing I never worried about for years. There was always horses coming in. If I had an empty stall, he either had one himself or he knew somebody that needed one broken. I never in my life have worried about empty stalls. That's one thing about it. And we just lived in the back. Peter's place was in the middle of a 100-acre bush. He went back this little goat path of a laneway, and he would ride back in there. And Pete loved to go ride out through the bush. And we'd made a little pen just in the middle of a hayfield. We just dug up an area, and that's what we trained horses on. There was no fences. Once we got them kind of going around a little fenced-in area at the barn, we got them out on that big empty open track in the middle of a 10-acre hayfield, and we loped them. We loped we wore out a lot of saddles.
Okay, so then after that, you're on your own. You took off from Pete's. You got married. You worked at a few different barns, right?
Yeah, we well, I was working on my own at Pete's. I'd had some of his horses, but he always let me just have the customers' horses. So I had my own horses. I had my own deal.
Okay.
And then got married to my first wife, Laura, and we bought into the farm up in Listowel. We moved up there, and then moved down south. We just moved around. I moved around a whole bunch. I just couldn't find a barn that could accommodate to be in a horse trainer's barn. And it is tough. Any
It's
horse
hard.
trainers
It's
that
hard
are
to share a facility. Super hard.
And went around a little bit. Showed a lot. That was at that point in my life. I was showing a lot. I was gone almost every weekend, and we had guys working for me, riding, grooms, and I was on the road a lot. I was definitely getting into the show horse stuff and doing an awful lot of that at that point. There was definitely some good horses. At that point, I had some really, really nice horses I was showing. Very fortunate, because it just seemed every time something would pop up, there was always a few people with the right horses the right timing was just, for me, was just incredible. You know, if I needed something to go show, it just always seemed there was something that would pop up that just always happened. And at that time, I'm going to say about the time in there when I moved out of Pete's, I didn't do any pleasure horses. All we did was reiners. Still did a pile of sale horses. That was always a huge part of my deal, was starting colts and sale horses, and you know, that type of horse. That was always a big part of my deal. And found a lot of show horses through the sale barns, and I always used to call them freaks of nature. You know, maybe stuff that wasn't supposed to be the cream of the crop, but if you worked on them right, you could sure make them something fancy. And I lucked out on that because I had a couple, you know, over the years that maybe weren't supposed to be big show horses, but just stepped up at the right times. And definitely had not just the horses, but I mean, I've been so fortunate to have a bunch of people in my life. I mean, even when we rodeoed, you know, as a kid, you know, I can remember some good friends of my dad's. There was the Weises and the Hardys and stuff, and, you know, we'd rope calves and ride all their steers, and, you know, and then Peter and Craig and Nelson with all the sale horses, and then, you know, and then I got into the show horses, and, you know, whereas Joe, you know, kind of talking about the little black horse, you know, we got on the road with that horse and drove him way too many miles and showed him. He just kept going, and McDonald's owned him, and then I started
I think
working.
Dee's watching. I think I've seen that Dee's watching tonight.
And then a couple of my customers, like Don Pletch and the Turpins, you know, I mean, they've been, well, customers and friends for 20 some years, and I still have horses for them. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, and then there was a point right when I got divorced with my first wife, you know, then Nancy Mariani and their family, you know, kept me with some horses for a little while that, you know, they sure didn't, you know, there's no need to it. They just had some nice horses, and it just, you know, I just lucked out every time. There was always just something there. Whether it be for the good or the bad, it kept me into the show horses, and maybe I should blame them more than thanking them. I don't know.
I'll talk a little louder so people can hear you.
But yeah, there was always just something going around, and it kept me into show horses. I still like roping, and the cow horses I like a lot. You know, there's not a huge part of it up here in Ontario, but I sure like them, and we like doing them. You know, we always kind of focus on the reiners here just because there's such a good market for it in Ontario, but there's all the different disciplines, and I still ride the odd pleasure horse every once in a while. We'll paint pleasure horse about once every 3 years, it seems, and still ride, you know, get a few of them broke for people. But the biggest thing for me was that with the show horses, that was never my biggest you know, ambition. It was always getting them broke, figuring out how to get them broke, and that always worked. I mean, when we talk about, you know, when I was a kid, I mean, likely my favorite memory is as a kid, I can remember being out in the front field, no fences. We had a little sorrel mare, and my dad led me around. I was going to be the first one to ride her. I was a kid. I was grade school. I don't know how old I'd be. And my dad led her around, and to get her broke, we picked corn cobs, and we tied the buckets to the horn of that saddle, and that's how we got that thing broke.
Wow. What?
It wasn't the smartest thing we did.
No.
I mean, that thing would take the bucket and the corn would get flying. And,
Oh my gosh.
but I mean, it was all about getting them broke. And my dad was such a big thing on getting colts broke. I guess, you know, it just started, and then, you know, working for Peter, and it was just a neat progression, I think, on all the show horses that, you know, you could get them to that point. And now, at this stage of it, of course, it's, you know, we raise some of our own, and, you know, definitely have way nicer horses now than I did 20 years ago.
Okay, so those were the days. I knew there was going to be some of these comments. Those were the
I can't read
days. Brad Sterling. I remember Peter's Place. He's right. It wasn't fancy, but it
It
worked.
wasn't fancy, but we got a lot of horses rode there.
Sally wants to know if you have a favorite horse. Oh, where did that go? Sally wants to know if you have a favorite horse from over the years. And if so, why?
I have
This
a
is
couple.
a whole different live, I feel like. Favorite horses is like a whole different live. But if you have to
I was
pick.
lucky enough to have a couple favorite horses. You know, for me, I had a couple. You know, growing up, one thing I always had when I was a kid is we had all the sale horses, but we had one horse that was always mine, like a little pony. And then when I grew it, then we would sell it, but it wasn't for sale. It was until I outgrew it, it stayed with me. And likely one of the first really fun horses I had was the ugliest Appaloosa you've ever seen in your life. This thing had great big feet on her, big
How
old
have I
head.
have I not heard this story?
Oh, there was some good
How
stories.
have I not
with her.
heard this story?
We
that
bought her
this is
because
your
she was
favorite
kind of.
horse. I
Well,
would
it wasn't
not
that she
have
was a
answered. I
favorite,
thought
but
I knew
as
the
a
answer
kid,
to this.
as a kid, she was a favorite horse. And then as
Okay.
I got into like the show
What
horses,
was that one called?
I'm a big joker.
Okay, I
And
didn't know
she
this.
was the biggest thing. I mean, it was huge. I was just a little peanut on an elephant. And then when I got into the show horses, I lucked out because when I first decided to show horses, well, in Italy, my favorite horse was a mare called Coyote Payout. The one I showed at the prefecture. She was just an incredible mare, and she just fit me. And then when I got into Canada, we, you know, I wanted to go show horses because I needed to make a name for myself. I mean, nobody knew who I was in the show horse world at the NRHA level because I'd never showed there. They didn't know who I was, and you know, I needed to go show. So I had made a deal with Dee McDonald and Lisa to show this I'm a Class 2 horse, and he was good talented wise, but he was great brained. And for a stud horse, he just went weekend after weekend, and we showed him all. I mean, we just put him in a, you know, put him in the horse trailer, and where would we go? And we always made a check on him. And he stayed, and even after me showing him as an open horse, stayed really good for Dee as a rookie horse. And then I had Genuine Summer Sun, who was just a really neat mare for me for many reasons. Turpin's owned her, and she died actually having her first foal, so that was a gut wrencher for all of us. We all really liked her. And then over the years, there was a few other ones, but there was always a bunch of really nice horses. But the biggest thing for me that made good horses, I had some that were super talented, but the ones for me that were the great ones that I loved were the good mind ones. You know, they could have half the talent, but if they had that brain and they could just go out and think with their brain and be show horses and want to be in the pen, they made great horses. And I mean, I've had some really talented horses. I have some really talented horses now, and you just don't know until you put that brain to work which ones are the really good ones. But you know, I could never complain. I mean, over the years I had, you know, the Bloomin' Little Peppy was sure good for me. We had just moved to this place, and I needed to go show a bunch. And he, the same thing, he just went weekend after weekend, and now he's, how old is he now? And now he's showing.
I don't know.
with,
He's like champion of the short stirrup
yeah,
now.
he's a short stirrup horse now, and that just goes to show he was
And
just
he
a great
breeding
brain.
stallion, and yeah, he's a great horse.
He was just a good brain, and that was what made so many good horses, was just they had good brains. And you know, you can have them talent, and there was lots of talented horses. I had some good show horses. I can't complain. I had for a couple of years, the old Blondie, you know,
Yeah,
seen
solid,
Melissa
steady.
Glitton was on here. She owns the mare now, and that was another mare. She was not the most talented mare I ever rode, but boy, I could run the wheels off her and come back the next weekend, and she'd still want to play the game. And she was just a great, great brain. You know, there's always one that just kept
And then
coming.
stayed great. Like
Mhm.
showed us a non-pro for a long time, and then had a couple babies, and then Melissa showed her
Mhm.
again, and
I think lately my favorite horse is one of the brood mares that stays here, but she, I only got to show her for a year and a half. She was a little chocolate chicken mare of Turpin's, but she just had an unbelievable brain to let you train her, and everybody laughs at her because she's, you know, well, she looks older now. She's 20-some years old, but she weaves.
She weaves like a son of a gun.
She weaves in
She
the
doesn't
pasture.
weave a little, she weaves a lot.
She weaved in the show pen with me one time. That was the funniest one. But you could teach her to do anything. And she was talented. She was physically talented too, and she won a bunch of bronzes. But now where she really holds a place is she has some babies that just are really, really cool. And I didn't get to show that mare as much as I would like. I heard her. We were in Ohio. We were at what was before the Buckeye was there, but it was that group had a derby, and she popped her stifle the night before I showed her, and she came back, but she was just never, you know, she was just a little off, so we didn't push her too hard. We got her qualified a few times and just played around with her and got her showed. But now as a broodmare, she was just the easiest horse. Same thing, she was great brained. But there was always a horse. It always seemed there was always a horse come along that just helped me out for me in my career. And for me to be a horse trainer was one that always kind of stepped it up.
Nancy's saying something. I'm not going to read it right now because I think it's going to make me cry. So I'm going to skip
Nancy
over
makes
that
everybody
one.
cry.
Mary McCallum asked if you have anything. I'm sorry if I'm missing your messages, you guys. There's more people watching than there has been in the past. So, Mary McCallum asked a question earlier about Peter as your mentor, and if you have any other major influences that are kind of comparable to Peter. And if this is the part where you want to say what a great influence
My lovely wife
I've
is.
been, go ahead.
I have been one of the most fortunate people in my life for the amount of people that took care of my sorry rear end when I needed it. Like I said, growing up as a kid, I wanted to go I wanted to go rodeo. And there was a friend of my dad's, I want to say it was a bar agent. Reg Hardy was his name. And we fixed his arena up, and he let me ride all his steers. I like he rode more beef off them steers, and he always, like, when you coming back? And the Weises were always there for, we wanted to go roping. We'd go up there. Then I got into rodeoing and traveling. A gentleman from Windsor, Chris Boutet, he hauled me all over the country and back again. And not in a bad way, he showed me how to be a good guy, and he showed me some things I'm not supposed to do too. He was good for entertainment. Then when I got into the show horses, of course, Peter was a huge part of my life. I mean, the man could train a horse, and he was just as honest as could be. He's just a great guy and good with feet. And then, in the last couple of years, it's definitely, some people I look up to, like Craig Black, and Don Pletch is just, just great guys. And I've been so fortunate with so many people. I'm sure I'm missing lots of people, but at every point in my life, I've had just great guys that were, and had no reason to help me. I mean, like, when Peter would call me, I had nothing to offer him other than a dumb Dutch kid that would do anything he told me to do. And, he'd take me in when, there were some things that happened, and he'd just come and pick me up and, hey, we're going shoeing horses. We're going, and that's one thing I can say. I've had so many people take care of me. It was unreal. And my dad, I know everybody always says their dad and whatever, but, my dad made sure anything that needed to happen, happened. If we needed to drive to Timbuktu in the middle of the night, he was in the truck. Where are we going? He'd stay awake all night and drive me around anywhere. And, if I needed help, he was the first one there. And yeah, when I was in Italy, I don't know how many times he'd send me videos or send me jeans. I don't know how many pairs of jeans I rode through. I'd ride the butt right out of jeans, and he'd always send me new shirt or two and a couple pairs of jeans every couple of weeks. And he never complained. He just, what do you need? And I was so fortunate to be surrounded by such great guys that and they didn't do it for them. Like there wasn't that I worked for them and they had to. It was just, it was just kept going. I never appreciated it when I was a kid. I mean, that's for sure. Appreciate it way more now with my girls and, how they all take care of the kids too and around there. But I've been so fortunate. It's unreal. I mean, pick a time in my life, I can give you 3 guys, that always would, above and beyond for me. I was so lucky at that. That was unreal. And had some great friends, I mean, one thing that I always laughed at with Peter when I was working for him is we would drive down the road and he would talk about, his friend lived in this spot and his friend lived over here and so lived over here. And I think, well, what's the big deal? And now as I'm, with the girls and getting a little older, I take a trip every once in a while and I go a far distance and I think, well, I remember when me and so were there, and I'll call one of my old buddies up or something and, we'll laugh about it, and the amount of people that we got to meet through the horses and the rodeo and was just unbelievable. I mean, and there's some bad people too, but more than off, I mean, just great people. And I was so lucky. I can't complain. There's nothing I can complain about. I don't think anybody had the amount of help that I had, and the amount of people and the amount of time those people brought into me, first of all.
Okay. So I feel like that sums her up. Where you learn to train horses. I don't know what time it is, but I feel like that's quite a lot of info about how Jess learned to train horses. If anybody has any questions, we'll just start to wrap up, I think, here. Will we? That covers a lot of stuff. Favorite horses, mentors, countries that you've been to.
A lot of sale horses.
Sale horses, show horses, different breeds.
It's always kind of hard to believe that the most thing that taught me how to show horses was sale horses. Mm-hmm. The not so good horses, you bring them in the sales ring and you had to spin them or stop, figure out what they were right in the minute and be able to bluff through it a little bit and kind of go with the horses. And that taught me to show. But getting them broke was definitely in the middle of a bush in Bothwell and riding the hair off them.
All right. If we have missed your questions, we'll make sure that we get to them afterwards when we close this live down. It looks like we have a couple of kids to put to bed here. So we'll make sure that we answer those questions for you. Thank you for watching, everybody. Oh my gosh.
This is my life now. 3 little girls.
This is it. It's as good as it gets. Thank you for jumping on and watching with us. We are back next week on Tuesday again at 7:30. And next week we're answering a question about...
Lindsay's
it's
life.
actually more about... No, it's not my life. I couldn't recount my life the way that you have there. And mine wouldn't be nearly as interesting. But mine is... The question next week is actually more about my history. It's about the school that I went to. It's about Meredith Manor International Equestrian Center, which unfortunately we just heard officially last week that the program is closing down. They couldn't survive the low enrollment with COVID, and the school is closing down. So we are going to talk about what it was like to be a student there. We're going to talk about Jess's perspective on the school, coming as a horse trainer who didn't attend an equestrian school, coming with his wife, or I guess girlfriend at the time. And if you guys have questions about any of that, about Meredith Manor, then you can go ahead and send those to me and I'll try to make sure that I answer them. But I want to try to answer the question, which was, what was it like being a student there? So that's what we'll be on about next week. Like I said, thanks for jumping on with us. Thank you to some of the longtime clients and friends for jumping on. That was kind of neat and fun. And thank you to the, 5 or 6 different people that asked for this question. Okay, have a good night, you guys. Thank you again, and we will see you
Momentum members, we'll see you Thursday because we're going live on Thursday. Anybody who's interested in finding out more about the online program, we will be on live on Sunday to answer questions about that. But we will be back here on Tuesday next week at 7:30 for the Q&A.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye. 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 Bye.